The Zarketh Dominion had arrived with elegance, their vessel slipping into orbit around Jupiter like a drifting shadow sculpted from onyx. A marvel of engineering by galactic standards, the diplomatic cruiser shimmered with resonant plasma fields, its elongated hull etched with the fractal markings of 17 conquered civilizations. Gold-trimmed fins projected status, while pulsating nebula beacons played ancient Zarketh hymns into the void. Songs meant to project power, legacy, and timeless dominance. To them, this was not an invasion. It was a presentation, a spectacle, of superiority meant to awe the primitive species of Earth into deference. From their command chamber, an opulent cathedral of glowing monoliths and levitating thrones, their overseer watched the blue planet with amused detachment. "Their oceans are unguarded," he murmured in tritone, his voice like molten glass and thunder. "Their satellites are few, their languages crude. This should be simple." He wasn't wrong about our simplicity, but he misunderstood its source. The broadcast they sent was choreographed to perfection. A soft, melodious voice speaking in flawless English declared, "We come in peace. We offer knowledge, unity, and protection from the terrors of the void." It was a message finely tuned, over centuries of galactic diplomacy, but hidden beneath the eloquent tones was something far more sinister, an encrypted pulse coded in the frequency of surrender, a subliminal signal used to psychologically destabilize civilizations too naive to detect it. It had worked countless times before, but this time, it didn't. Earth didn't respond with fear, or awe, or even curiosity. We responded with silence. Unnerved, the Overseer ordered scans. They combed Earth's surface, expecting to find chaos, or perhaps hasty preparations for war. Civilizations panicking, governments trembling, but what they found was nothing. Civilian life continued, undisturbed. No mass mobilization, no fleet movements, no attempts to communicate or plead. The Overseer leaned forward, talons twitching. "Do they not understand who we are?" But Earth understood perfectly, and Earth had learned long ago that diplomacy with predators was futile. 3 hours later, deep beyond Neptune's orbit, space itself bent in silent agony as something unnatural clawed its way into existence. Gravitational readings spiked. Local space-time fluctuated. From the event horizon of a micro-wormhole emerged a shape that swallowed starlight itself. The Vindicator. It didn't enter like a ship. It emerged like a verdict. A colossal silhouette of matte black armor layered with kinetic absorbent plating and pulsing with quantum-powered weapon cores. It was 7 kilometers of unresolved vengeance, an embodiment of every war humanity had fought, every betrayal we had endured, and every mistake we had promised never to repeat. The Vindicator didn't flash, or glow, or sing. It brooded. Every movement calculated, every inch radiating lethality. It was built not to impress, but to devastate. Inside the bridge, more akin to a fortress than a cockpit, Admiral Vera Cade stood like a statue carved from war itself. Scarred from Earth's last orbital siege, she wore no medals, no rank insignias, just black tactical armor, bearing the symbol of the United Terran Defense Accord, a broken planet wrapped in the coils of a phoenix. Around her, the crew worked. In silence, fingers dancing across glowing control surfaces, eyes locked on data projections, as the Zarketh fleet appeared on tactical displays. "They sent an envoy," her XO said, voice tight with disdain. "With ceremonial drones and some sort of psychoacoustic messaging. Looks like they're trying to brainwash us," Cade smirked. "Cute." She turned her gaze toward the main viewport. Beyond the reinforced glass, Jupiter loomed, red storms swirling in the distance. And floating proudly before it, unaware of the predator approaching, was the Zarketh fleet. 23 ships in a staggered formation. Elegantly spaced, ceremonial, inefficient, and predictable. They had no idea what was coming. Cade raised her hand. "Wake the Spectres. Ready Hornet swarms 1 through 5. Power the Gravlance, and send the pulse." The communications officer hesitated. "You want to respond?" "No. I want them to feel us." Moments later, every Zarketh ship received the same transmission. Not a message in words, but a data pulse. Inside it was a visual feed, just 5 seconds long. A frozen frame of the Vindicator, its railgun charged and glowing, aimed directly at their lead cruiser. Then the screen went black. The Zarketh panicked. Dozens of transmissions flooded space, requesting clarification, demanding answers, issuing threats cloaked in diplomacy. Their protocols were spinning, centuries of arrogance, unable to explain what they had just seen. They assumed we would talk. They assumed we'd negotiate, grovel, or at the very least answer, but we didn't come to impress. We came to remind them what fear really looked like. The Gravlance fired first. It wasn't visible like conventional weapons. It didn't flash or flare. It tore space between its origin and target, collapsing the distance and creating a rift so cold, so empty, that atoms themselves cried out. The Zarketh command cruiser split in two, its midsection torn as though reality itself had turned sideways. There was no explosion, just disintegration. One moment it existed. The next, it didn't. The Vindicator didn't pause. From the shadows, behind Jupiter, 4 Spectre-class cruisers decloaked, their hulls wrapped in electromagnetic veils. They moved like whispers, untraceable and merciless. From their bays emerged hundreds of microdrones, each the size of a human torso, each containing predictive combat AIs, developed in zero-gravity wargames against simulated Xenos for 20 years. They didn't need orders, they only needed targets. The Zarketh fired back. Lance bolts, plasma arcs, ion disruptors, all dazzling displays of energy, beautiful in their theatricality. But war isn't theater. War is mathematics, and humanity had rewritten the equation. One Zarketh vessel, desperately trying to flee, activated a gravity surge to jump into subspace. But the Vindicator had anticipated this. A gravitic mine, undetectable, tethered to local dark matter strands, detonated before the surge could initiate. The resulting implosion aged the ship 4 centuries in an instant. It rusted, decayed, and crumbled into dust, before even disappearing from sensors. On the Vindicator's bridge, Admiral Cade remained still. The crew whispered, "Target eliminated, Spectres reporting minimal resistance, Hornets penetrating all flanks." Cade spoke only once more before ending the transmission. "They wanted to impress us with ceremony," she said, voice low. "But Earth doesn't kneel. Not anymore." And across the stars, the Zarketh Dominion learned something they would never forget. You don't intimidate the survivors of 1,000 wars. You do not try to awe humanity, because we don't build ships to be admired. We build them to end you. The aftermath of the Zarketh encounter echoed through the galaxy like a silent thunderclap. No explosion, no fanfare, just a deafening absence where once stood pride, power, and presumed superiority. The Dominion's central broadcast network went dark for 16 cycles. Entire star clusters under Zarketh rule received no orders, no guidance, no reassurances. For the first time in millennia, the overseers had no script. The arrogance that had once wrapped their civilization like imperial silk had been burned away in a single catastrophic engagement. But Earth barely blinked. Back home, the event was never announced publicly. No parades, no celebrations. Just another classified log buried in the labyrinthine data vaults of the United Terran Defense Accord. To the public, the stars were quiet, peaceful. To those who knew better, the stars had become cautious. The Vindicator returned not as a hero, but as a shadow. It anchored itself behind Titan's orbit, buried in a lattice of signal absorption fields and chameleon plating. Its mission had not been to make a statement, but to remind the galaxy of a truth long forgotten. Humanity had been quiet by choice, not by weakness. For centuries, Earth had been dismissed by the galactic elite. Our early radio broadcasts were once mocked as primitive drivel. Our chemical rockets, blazing, noisy, inefficient, were seen as the tantrums of a planetary child. Even our first ventures into deep space were watched with condescension by more enlightened species, many of whom had never needed to wage war or earn survival the hard way. The aftermath of the Zarketh encounter echoed through the galaxy, like a silent thunderclap. No explosion, no fanfare, just a deafening absence where once stood pride, power, and presumed superiority. The Dominion's central broadcast network went dark for 16 cycles. Entire star clusters under Zarketh rule received no orders, no guidance, no reassurances. For the first time in millennia, the overseers had no script. The arrogance that had once wrapped their civilization like imperial silk had been burned away in a single catastrophic engagement. But Earth? Earth barely blinked. Back home, the event was never announced publicly. No parades, no celebrations. Just another classified log buried in the labyrinthine data vaults of the United Terran Defense Accord. To the public, the stars were quiet, peaceful. To those who knew better, the stars had become cautious. The Vindicator returned not as a hero, but as a shadow. It anchored itself behind Titan's orbit, buried in a lattice of signal absorption fields and chameleon plating. Its mission had not been to make a statement, but to remind the galaxy of a truth long forgotten. Humanity had been quiet by choice, not by weakness. For centuries, Earth had been dismissed by the galactic elite. Our early radio broadcasts were once mocked as primitive drivel. Our chemical rockets, blazing, noisy, inefficient, were seen as the tantrums of a planetary child. Even our first ventures into deep space were watched with condescension by more enlightened species, many of whom had never needed to wage war or earn survival the hard way. What they failed to understand was this: humans didn't evolve in luxury. We evolved in chaos. Our ancestors survived not on towering intellect alone, but through sheer adaptability, ruthless ingenuity, and an unmatched capacity to weaponize knowledge. We had transformed stone into arrowheads, fire into strategy, and fear into dominance. We learned to weaponize physics, harness the violence of atoms, and whisper to the very fabric of space-time. And we did it all without help. Humanity's warships, like the Vindicator, were not born from conquest or empire, but from scars. Each hull plate was forged in memory of cities lost to orbital bombardment. Each reactor tuned in the cold math of survival, not spectacle. When we studied alien designs, we didn't seek inspiration. We reverse-engineered weaknesses. The Zarketh's aesthetic curves and power-singing hulls were designed for reverence and ceremony. Our designs were silent killers, sleek, brutal, and efficient. You didn't salute a Terran warship, you feared it. And yet, the question remained: why had we waited? Why had Earth, with all its latent power, all its silent fleets hidden in Lagrange, shadows and interstellar dead zones, chosen patience instead of aggression? Because we remembered history. Our own. The third collapse taught us what happens when ambition outpaces wisdom. The orbital rebellions of the Terran fracture left entire space stations dead. Floating tombs of political arrogance. And the silent horror of the Mars outbreak? That taught us humility. We didn't just learn how to fight. We learned when not. To humanity became dangerous not because we could wage war, but because we learned when to wait. So when the Zarketh arrived with their glowing oratory and arrogant projections, Earth's leaders didn't need time to debate. They'd already run the simulations, dozens of threat models, thousands of alien profiles, every possible variable from cultural supremacy complexes to genetic predispositions toward deception. It wasn't paranoia. It was protocol. The Vindicator had been waiting in the shadows. For over a decade, it was one of 6. The others, codenamed Spectre, Tyrant, Omen, Bastion, and Eclipse, remained hidden, deployed in mathematically optimal positions throughout the solar system and beyond, each capable of responding to a different class of threat. Not just alien fleets, but extinction-level asteroids, rogue artificial intelligences, or temporal anomalies. Earth's arsenal wasn't just built for warfare. It was built for every possible future. Each ship bore a crew trained from childhood, selected not for obedience, but for perspective. Philosophers with weapons training, engineers who'd studied both Sun Tzu and Gödel, officers who'd memorized not just the battlefield, but the psychology of first contact failures. On Earth, these people were anonymous, faceless names in encrypted databases. In space, they were the sentinels of humanity's last line, guardians not just of our lives, but of our memory, what we had suffered to get this far, and what we would never suffer again. And beyond strategy, beyond firepower, there was one final weapon we carried that no other species could replicate. Rage. Not the blind fury of beasts, but the cold, righteous fury of a species that had once stood on the brink of its own annihilation, looked into the abyss and said, "Not today." A fury forged in Hiroshima, sharpened in the fires of the Kessler Cascade, and tempered by the long silence after the Europa catastrophe. This was the soul of the Vindicator, not a machine of war, but a reminder that we could end stars if we chose to. That if provoked, humanity wouldn't beg. We would unmake. And the galaxy, long content in its hierarchy of power, was beginning to feel it. Civilizations that once ignored Earth now reviewed Terran telemetry with trembling claws and widened eyes. Trade envoys, once dismissive, now arrived bearing not gifts, but apologies. Pirate clans stopped venturing near the asteroid belt. Even the notorious Nexari raiders, known for harvesting lesser civilizations for genetic material, redirected their attention toward easier prey. They had seen the footage. They had heard the pulse. The Zarketh Dominion, once considered too vast to challenge, had now gone completely silent. Not a single vessel left their territory. Their outer colonies stopped transmitting. Their embassy on Tau Ceti was found abandoned. Some whispered they were preparing retaliation. Others believed they were simply unraveling. A 1,000-year empire undone not by fleets or treaties or economic collapse, but by a single warship, a Terran warship. The galaxy finally understood. We weren't looking to impress. We were just making sure you never forget. As the stars realigned themselves in the wake of Earth's silent statement, a quiet paranoia began to ripple through the higher echelons of interstellar society. It wasn't just fear. It was a fundamental shift in perception. The very species once labeled pre-warp primitives were now a strategic anomaly. The galaxy had underestimated Earth, not because it was weak, but because it had been watching rather than speaking. And when it finally moved, it moved like a ghost, without warning, without mercy, and without seeking recognition. In the grand halls of the Arkan Syndicate, where silver-robed diplomats once spoke of Terrans as a biological curiosity, meetings turned private, their golden rhetoric, now replaced with silent data feeds of the Vindicator's strike. One feed, captured by a cloaked Nexari reconnaissance drone, showed the warship transitioning out of quantum slipspace with zero heat signature, launching precision strikes before its form had even fully stabilized. The footage, just 6 seconds long, became the most encrypted file in Syndicate history. Unauthorized viewing carried the penalty of immediate disintegration. Not out of punishment, but out of shame. Because in those 6 seconds, the Vindicator hadn't just defeated a fleet. It had unwritten everything the Syndicate thought it knew about power. And Earth knew this would happen. Deep beneath the surface of Antarctica, in the icy vaults of the Polaris Black Site, a neural think tank known only as the Assembly had predicted every major galactic response within a 0.3% deviation. The Assembly wasn't just a supercomputer. It was a human AI fusion mind composed of 36 post-organic intellects and the consciousness remnants of Earth's most visionary tacticians. It didn't speculate. It calculated inevitabilities. Their models didn't only analyze galactic politics, they rewrote them. The moment the Vindicator emerged and silenced the Zarketh fleet, the Assembly activated dormant protocols across every human-aligned system. Civilian cargo ships suddenly altered course. Relay satellites began broadcasting new quantum ID signals. Research stations deployed subspace stealth buoys, previously dismissed as budgetary ghost projects. Every Terran vessel, from the Mars, mining tugs to the Neptune orbital labs, adopted encrypted communications layered with a tri-level cipher structure, something no known alien AI could crack. Because humanity hadn't just prepared for defense, it had prepared for fallout, and fallout there was, within days. The Krell Confederacy, the self-proclaimed galactic moderators, dispatched emissaries to Earth's outer listening stations. Their envoys, towering beings of silicon bone and photon thread musculature, offered not threats, but treaties. They came bearing gifts of hyperstable element matrices, data on dark energy harmonics, even genetic archives of extinct star beasts. These were not olive branches. They were bribes. attempts to buy peace from a species they had once refused. Entry into the Galactic conquered on grounds of emotional volatility. Now they called it strategic unpredictability. Earth, ever the paradox, didn't respond with fanfare. No triumphant broadcasts, no political declarations, just a series of calm transmissions released to public galactic channels, repeating a single line in 1,000 languages. We are not your enemy, but we will not be underestimated again. For some species, this was reassurance. For others, it was a final warning. Yet even amid this cosmic shift, Earth's own people remained largely unaware of the scale of what had occurred. The United Terran Council intentionally downplayed the Vindicator incident in public logs, chalking it up to an unknown system malfunction during a routine diplomatic mission. The few who questioned the anomaly were redirected, distracted, or quietly folded into classified programs. But the Council wasn't hiding the truth out of fear. Sa was protection. Because the truth was this: humanity's rise was not yet complete. The Vindicator was merely one of the visible ships. Deep beneath Jupiter's storms, in a gravity-twisting pocket of engineered space, floated the Nexus Dreadforge, a hidden shipyard powered by quantum entanglement reactors and shielded by time-dilated event barriers. It was here the second generation vessels were born. Vessels not merely designed to confront the galaxy, but to challenge the very physics that governed it. One such prototype, codenamed Prometheus Unchained, was a warship not limited to engines or weapons. It was an intelligence, in and of itself, housed in a frame of matter. Engineered singularity mesh, capable of altering gravitational constants within localized space-time. Where the Vindicator had used precision and stealth, the Prometheus would use redefinition, turning enemy calculations against them by literally rewriting the rules of engagement mid-battle. But these projects remained secret, even to most of Earth, because while the galaxy reeled from one ship, Earth had always been playing a longer game. For decades, humanity had kept its true capabilities shrouded not out of weakness, but out of understanding. The stars, for all their beauty, were not kind. Civilizations rose and fell not because they lacked power, but because they wielded it too soon or too loudly. Earth had learned this the hard way in its own past. From Rome to the Ark cities of the lunar collapse, history was littered with examples of unchecked supremacy followed by devastating ruin. So we watched, we studied. We endured centuries of mockery, alien embargoes, and cultural isolation. And we built. Now, we didn't just have warships. We had a philosophy of power, measured, precise, and patient. Where others relied on awe and intimidation, we relied on certainty. The certainty that if the time came, we could end a war before it began. Because when you understand fear, not just as a weapon, but as a language, you don't need to shout. You only need to whisper. And Earth had whispered loud enough that the entire galaxy was now listening. The Vindicator's strike had not been a fluke. It had been an opening salvo. In a battle humanity had been preparing for centuries. In the wake of that initial strike, the ripples of uncertainty spread far beyond the Arkan Syndicate. Civilizations that had once dismissed humanity as an inconsequential species now found themselves scrambling to recalibrate their strategies. And this was only the beginning. The Zarketh fleet, which had been torn apart in mere minutes, had been one of the most feared in the quadrant. To many, they represented the pinnacle of military prowess. Crimson-armored warships that could endure the destructive power of a supernova. Their tactics were renowned for their brutal efficiency, capable of sweeping entire star systems clear of resistance. Yet despite their superior technology and reputation for being the galaxy's most formidable force, the Zarketh had been unable to withstand the sheer precision of Earth's technology. What the Zarketh had failed to realize, and what the rest of the galaxy would soon come to understand, was that humanity did not rely on sheer firepower alone. The Vindicator had not obliterated the Zarketh fleet by overwhelming it. No, it had outthought them at every turn. In fact, the real shock wasn't in the warship's capabilities, it was in its design. Every aspect of the Vindicator's technology had been created with one fundamental principle in mind: adaptability. Unlike most galactic warships, which were designed for specific roles, the Vindicator was a versatile engine of destruction, capable of shifting its form to meet whatever threat it faced. The ship's reactors were designed to manipulate subatomic particles on an unprecedented scale, allowing for rapid reconfiguration of weapon systems and shielding in real time. Its sensors could instantly interpret enemy tactics, allowing the ship to respond with brutal efficiency. It could predict the trajectory of enemy fire before the weapons had even launched, recalibrating its defenses on the fly. As the Vindicator tore through the Zarketh fleet, it became clear that humanity had not simply learned from other civilizations. They had innovated. Earth had studied the mistakes of others, understood the limits of traditional warfare, and pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The Zarketh may have had vast fleets, but they lacked the ingenuity that humanity had perfected. And this was the true threat. Earth's ability to think, to question, and to create solutions when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. This wasn't just a technological advantage, it was a philosophical one. Back on Earth, in the shadow of the Polaris black site, the engineers who had designed the Vindicator, humans and AI alike, watched in silent satisfaction as their creation achieved its first victory. They had known what the galaxy had yet to discover. Humanity didn't just want to survive the stars. Humanity wanted to reshape them. For centuries, Earth had been playing a long game. It had watched, it had learned, and now it was prepared to act. But the victory wasn't simply in the power of its weapons. The real strength of humanity lay in its ability to see the big picture. To understand that war was not won by brute force alone, but by the ability to outthink and outmaneuver opponents. The Vindicator had demonstrated this beyond a shadow of a doubt. It wasn't the ship's size, firepower, or speed that had made it a threat. It was the mind behind it. As the Zarketh fleet was reduced to smoldering debris, the galactic community was left with one pressing question. What else did Earth have in store? In the days that followed, the Intergalactic Council convened for emergency meetings. Representatives from the Syndicate, the Krell, and the Valeth, a reptilian species known for their brutal expansionist tendencies, flooded the council chambers, each offering their own analysis of the situation. They argued over whether the Terran's victory had been a one-time anomaly or a sign of a larger, more dangerous trend. The Valeth were the first to make a move. They dispatched an envoy, a hulking, scaly figure with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp talons, demanding a direct confrontation with humanity. They believed that the Zarketh's defeat had been a fluke, and they were eager to prove that their might was superior. But humanity, ever patient, was not eager for another confrontation. Not yet. Instead, Earth issued an invitation. Meet us on neutral ground. The location was no accident. It was a desolate moon orbiting the gas giant Thalor, a barren rock that had no strategic value, at least not to any race that had yet to understand humanity's true nature. To the galactic powers, it was a neutral meeting point where no one could hide behind an advantage. And so, the Valeth came. The Syndicate watched. The Zarketh, bruised but not broken, observed from afar. What happened next would set the tone for humanity's rise. As the Valeth fleet entered the moon's orbit, they were met not with the sudden barrage of laser fire or missile strikes that they expected, but with an eerie silence. The neutral zone was quiet, deceptively so, and then the Vindicator appeared. It didn't declaim its presence with flashy lights or grandiose displays. Instead, it simply dropped out of quantum space, silent, unseen, its hull barely reflecting the light of the distant sun. There was no warning, no time to react. The Valeth ships, though powerful, were caught entirely off guard. Their systems began to glitch. Their weapon systems malfunctioned. Shields flickered and failed. A single encrypted message echoed through their comms. Consider your options carefully. We can end this before it begins. The Valeth, who had once believed they could crush humanity with ease, found themselves trapped in the silence of space, their most advanced weapons rendered inert by a ship that barely made a sound. In those tense moments, the galaxy came to understand one inescapable truth. Humanity didn't need to dominate. It needed only to outlast. The Vindicator wasn't a weapon of mass destruction. It was a weapon of control, a reminder that humanity's strength was in its ability to respond, to adapt, and to survive. As the Valeth envoy hesitated, The true message of humanity's power became clear. Earth wasn't asking for permission. It was simply stating a fact. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but it was only moments. The Valeth envoy stood at the helm of their flagship, utterly confounded. Their entire fleet was now trapped in a technological straitjacket, helpless against the sheer unpredictability of humanity's warship, the Vindicator. No one had seen it coming. Not the Syndicate, not the Krell, and certainly not the Valeth. This was a new kind of power, and it was undeniable. How? The envoy's voice crackled through the comms, the disbelief thick in his words. One of the humans aboard the Vindicator, Captain Naomi Cross, responded. Her voice was calm but filled with a quiet intensity. Because we don't fight like you. We don't need to overwhelm you with sheer firepower. We need to outthink you. She paused, allowing her words to settle in. And the thing about thinking is, you never know what we'll do next. A flicker of realization spread through the Valeth envoy's mind. Humanity's advantage wasn't just in its technology, it was in its mindset. The Valeth, like most other alien species, had relied on tried-and-true methods. Their tactics had been perfected over centuries of conquest, overwhelming force, swift destruction, fear. They had believed they were the apex predators of the galaxy, their fleets unmatched. Yet, when faced with humanity's ingenuity, their tactics seemed almost archaic, outdated. They had underestimated humanity's most potent weapon, its ability to adapt, innovate, and learn. In a heartbeat, the Valeth ships began to power down, their engines sputtering, weapon systems frozen. They had no way to fight back. They were at the mercy of a species they had dismissed for so long. And then, humanity's voice rang out, not in an act of aggression, but in something far more dangerous. Control. Your fleets are defeated, Naomi said, her voice now echoing across the communication channels of every ship in the Valeth fleet. We will not destroy you. We will leave you to consider your position. But know this. Humanity does not need to conquer your worlds. We do not need to wipe out your people. We simply need you to understand that we are the future of this galaxy, and we will not bow to those who would try to dominate us. There was an almost palpable shift in the tone of the room aboard the Valeth flagship. The ambassador's face tightened. This was not the message they had expected to hear. They had hoped to intimidate the Terrans, to bring them to their knees, with a display of power. But instead, they had been shown something they hadn't considered. A future where their fleets, their very way of life, could be rendered obsolete, not by brute force, but by the unstoppable march of human creativity. And it was here, in the cold void of space, that a new paradigm was born. For the first time in galactic history, humanity wasn't seen as a threat to be crushed. It was seen as something far more dangerous. A new power, one that would reshape the very fabric of the galaxy. The Valeth, once an unstoppable force, realized they had no answer for the relentless tide of human innovation. The Vindicator's message, broadcast across the stars, reverberated through every corner of the galaxy. The Syndicate, watching from the safety of their own systems, saw the same truth emerge. Humanity was no longer a small, isolated world at the mercy of the stars. They were a rising power, capable of taking on anyone and anything, with a relentless, unyielding will to win, not by brute force, but by outsmarting, outlasting, and overcoming. The Valeth envoy, left with no response, did what many species before him had done in the face of humanity's unexpected power. He bowed his head, a sign of respect, albeit begrudgingly. The galaxy would never be the same. As word spread, other civilizations took notice. The Syndicate, once confident in its supremacy, began to question its place in the cosmos. The Krell, a race known for its superior strength and unyielding conquests, began to reanalyze their position. And the Valeth? They withdrew from the galactic stage, licking their wounds, knowing they had met their match. But Earth did not stop there. The Vindicator's victory was only the beginning. Humanity's leadership, having understood the weight of their newfound power, set their eyes on a larger stage, the future. They didn't want to simply survive. They wanted to shape the galaxy, to ensure that their voice was heard. No longer would they be the underdogs, the helpless species at the mercy of intergalactic bullies. Humanity had proven that they could defend themselves, but now they would prove they could lead. And so, the Terran government began to chart a course toward a new era of diplomacy, one where alliances would be forged, and humanity's place in the cosmos would be secured, not by the might of their warships alone, but by the strength of their ideas and their vision for the future. Humanity, now standing at the crossroads of history, had become something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that would not only fight for its survival, but would remake the universe on its own terms. The victory over the Valeth was just the start of a long, difficult journey. But humanity had proven that when pushed to the edge, there was nothing more formidable than the will and ingenuity of a species that refused to be defeated. The Vindicator would return to Earth soon, to its place of origin, where it would be celebrated as a symbol of humanity's triumph. But the true victory lay not in the destruction of fleets or the destruction of empires. It lay in the idea that humanity had claimed its place in the stars, a place earned not through war, but through the relentless pursuit of a future where they could thrive. And so, as the galaxy watched in stunned silence, one thing became abundantly clear. No one would ever underestimate humanity again. What do you think? Has humanity finally earned its place among the stars? If you enjoyed this tale of human triumph, don't forget to like and share this story with others who need to hear it, and, as always, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going and explore even more ways humanity will change the galaxy forever.